would be for obviously the community to make submissions on this proposal as it stands, and then to make further submissions on the port chapter when we deal with that.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'll make sure that information is passed back. Thank you.
Very good. Carry on through.
So just on temporary accommodation, we've identified on the planning maps those properties that have been granted consent. We've rezoned them commercial to recognise that that's permanent. However, we don't want to apply that across the board, and the general approach in the chapter is to direct or provide for those activities to relocate back to centres, and to assess each case on its merits as it comes forward for resource consent. If in fact they apply for resource consent, it could be that they apply under their own willingness to, they shift back under their own steam. Having said that, obviously the strategic directions chapter does give some policy support to recognise the circumstances that some businesses face. And just in terms of urban design, whilst I noted that there was concerns expressed about the lack of recognition of functional requirements of the supermarkets and big box retailers, there's a lot of support from the public for higher quality outcomes in our commercial centres. Feedback seeking that there's good looking, well-designed buildings, and so in that respect it's positive, but we need to also recognise there's a functional aspect to what businesses require, and so we've inserted in a policy around design the need to recognise the functional requirements of those businesses while ensuring that that's balanced with good design. So that's just a brief overview of 3 of the issues, but I'd welcome.
Yanni, do you want to jump in there?
Just a little bit concerned about the temporary relocation, to say that you've actually rezoned the temporary into the permanent.
We've rezoned land that's been given resource consent in that location where Cafe Metro is, to provide for that on an ongoing basis, which in reality reflects what has happened through the consents process, and which... So
you've rezoned land that was temporary, that has had a resource consent to now be permanent. But you're not rezoning land that's got a temporary consent that's still got a temporary consent.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
I presume there's a whole bunch of conditions attached to the consent. I think when we get the information back, it'd be interesting to see what the conditions are. One of the issues, again, is that our conditions of our resource consents aren't monitored, aren't enforced, and what tends to happen is once people have the consent, you might get a change of owner, you might get a change of business, and the conditions become, kind of an afterthought. So I'm a little bit concerned about this approach.
That's a good point, and I actually wonder whether we could get the information around the resource consent that sat behind the development out at what's your area, Jamie, where they've got difficulty with the parking that the community board took me to?
You mean the Russley Business Park?
No, it was not called the Russley Business. It's called the Airport.
Oh, yes.
Airport Park. Business Park, but it is not owned by the airport. No. In fact, they made that point to me many times that they do not own it. They have nothing to do with it, and they wish it wasn't called the airport one because it looks like it is associated with them, but it's just located quite close to the airport.
And that's the one with the IRD.
It's the IRD, but the IRD didn't develop the building. No. They moved into the building, again as a temporary relocation until they go back. But somebody told me that the resource consent around that requires the parking to be confined to the site, and if that's the case, then somebody is in breach of a resource consent. And Yanni's right; it's not being enforced. And what the community board gets left with, the only tool in their toolbox, is to put in a 2-hour parking restriction. But for the residences, for the residential streets, tiny little narrow streets, even with one side dedicated to only 2 hours parking, it's just a nightmare to negotiate.
I'm happy to give you a copy of those 2 consents, the Airport Park and the Metro Cafe. Enforcement, of course, is not an area that we deal with in the district plan, but certainly
but if we're going to create the permanent change to the zoning, then we actually do
That's
need to
right.
understand what the conditions were.
And before, hopefully, they all come in for their permission for a full-time consent.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why there's an urgency with these chapters.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other temporary activities like containers, like works depots. Is anyone doing a survey of, because I actually think part of the solution may be extending the time frame for the temporary, but with a really clear indication that there is an end date. Whereas I think what's happening is because the rebuild's been so slow, the central city's been so slow, it's been blocked off for a long time, and there's other things, insurance settlements are taking so long, that it is hard for people to move forward. So I do wonder whether one of the other options, whether you've considered, is granting an extension to the temporary consents rather than making it permanent.
But anyway, we need to adjourn for morning tea. I have a call that I need to take. So if we could adjourn now from 10:15 until 10:30, then I'll see you back here at 10:30. Thank you.